Dear students, welcome to our today lecture. In our recent lectures, we have discussed that what is the difference between movement and shifting. In our today lecture, we will discuss them graphically, that how can we draw the shifting and movement of the demand curve. So basically, what is meant by movement and what is meant by shifting? When there is change in those variables which are written on the axis of any graph, then they will bring movement in that curve. And when there is change in those variables which are not mentioned on the axis, which are outside of the model, then they will bring shifting in the any curve. For example, when we are discussing about the demand curve, there are only two variables. One is price and the other one is demand. Price is independent variable and the demand is dependent variable. So any change in price will brings movement along the curve, while when there is no change in price and demand increases or decreases, then there will be shifting of the demand curve. So any factor which is outside of the model, or any change in those variables which are being kept constant in law of demand according to ceteris paribus or law of assumptions, if any change occur in those variables which are being kept constant, then they will shift our demand curve or any curve. Okay, so movement is when there is change in those variables which are mentioned on the axis, and when there is change in those variables which are not mentioned on the axis, then there will be shifting of that curve. So let's discuss what are the factors which brings shifting in the demand curve. There are basically five factors. There may be more than five factors, but here we are discussing only five factors, five important variables or five important factors which brings shifting in the demand curve. First one is income. Second one is price of the related goods. Third one is taste. Fourth one is population. And the fifth one is expected future prices. Now let's discuss each of them one by one. As you can see in this graph, there is only one price and there are two quantities. There is no change in price, but demand increases from 15 to 25. Price is same, but demand increases from 15 to 25. So this is called increase or rise in demand. And when this is the case, then there will be shifting of the demand curve. When there is no change in price, but demand increases. So why demand is increasing? Demand is increasing because maybe your income increases, maybe fashion increases, or maybe there is a change in fashion, maybe there is a change in taste, or maybe population increases, or maybe the price of related good increases. So there may be certain reasons, but all those reasons are outside of the model, which are being not written on either of the axis. So when your income increases, you are willing to buy more goods. You are not considering the price. So by seeing this price, you are now buying this amount of quantity. So when there is no change in price and demand increases, demand curve will shift outward. Similarly, when there is no change in price and demand decreases from 50 to 40, for example, then the demand curve will shift inward. As you can see that in this case, there is also no change in price, but demand decreases. So movement occur when both of these variable changes, price changes and quantity also changes, then there will be movement. But if there is change in only one of these variable, either price changes or either quantity changes, one of them is being kept constant, then there will be shifting. When there is change in both of the variable, then there will be movement along the curve. we have a single demand curve and we are moving from point here to here and here, we are moving from only one demand curve. So our next discussion is about extension and contraction of demand. Extension occurs when price decreases and demand increases. It is called extension of demand. As you can see in this table that price decreases from 10 to 5 and demand increases from 30 to 45. According to law of demand, when price decreases, demand increases. Price decreases, demand increases. And what is mean by contraction of demand? Contraction of demand means when price increases and demand decreases. It is called contraction of demand. Price increases from 10 to 15 and demand decreases from 30 to 25. So that is called extension and contraction of demand, but there are two other cases which are called rise and fall of demand. Most of the time students think that extension and contraction and rise and fall of demand both are same, but this is not the case. Extension and contraction occur when there is change in price and quantity demand both. When both changes, price and quantity demand both changes, then there is extension and contraction. And when only price changes or only quantity demand changes, then there is rise and fall. So now let's discuss about rise and fall of demand. So here as you can see that according to definition of rise of demand, when there is no change in price and demand increases, it is called rise of demand. As you can see in the table, price is 10 but demand increases from 15 to 25. So this is the case for shifting of demand curve. You can see that price is same but there is change in still change quantity demand changes. So there are other factors which are we discussed earlier like income, taste, fashion, population. They are changing our demand. And fall of demand mean when there is no change in price and demand decreases, that is called fall of demand. As you can see in the table that price is 10 and 10 but demand decreases from 50 to 40. So when there is no change in price and demand increases, that is called rise of demand. And when there is no change in price and demand decreases, that is called fall of demand. Similarly, as we have written here, price is constant but demand increases. Price is constant but demand decreases, that is called fall, and that is called rise of demand. So now let's discuss all of these cases in a single graph. We will discuss now extension, contraction, rise and fall, or we can say movement and shifting of the demand curve in a single graph. So you can see here that we have two demand curve. One is the case for shifting of the demand curve, and on the other hand we have a single demand curve and we have 2 points on a single demand curve. That is the case of movement of the demand curve. So now let's first discuss about the movement of demand curve. As we discussed earlier that movement occur when both variables changes which are written on y and x-axis. As you can see in the table that price and quantity demand both are changing. So this will be the case of movement of the demand curve. As you can see that price decreases from 700 to 600 and demand increases from 3 million to 4 million, as we have written quantity in million. So when price decreases, quantity demand increases. Price decreases to 600 and demand increases to 4 million. So we move from point A to point B. We are on a single demand curve. So when we are moving from single demand curve and we are changing our position, that is called movement along the curve. When we are moving from point A to B, and we can see, we can also write multiple points here. Like when price decreases 600 to 500, then quantity demand increases to 5, and we have another point here which is called point C. So when we are on a single demand curve and we are changing our position on a single demand curve, that is called movement along the curve, and that is because of when there is change in both variables. So now let's discuss about the shifting case. As you can see that there is no change in price but demand increases from 3 million to 5 million. As you can see that price is 700 and demand is 3. On similar price of 700, now demand increases from 3 to 4 million. So one variable is fixed but other is changing. So when this is the case, our curve will shift. And now we are discussing about demand curve. So in this case, our demand curve will shift outward as our demand is increasing. So main summary or main crunch of today's discussion is that movement occur when both of these variable changes which are mentioned on the axis, and shifting occur when there is change in those variables which are not mentioned on the axis, which are outside of the model, which are being kept constant in assumptions. So any change in those variable will shift our demand curve, and when there is change in both of these variable, then there will be movement along the curve. So now we will discuss in detail all those factors which are shifting our demand curve. We will discuss them one by one. The first factor which shifted our demand curve, that is income. In assumption we kept this variable as constant, but when there is change in income, when income increases we will buy more goods, so our demand increases. So that increase in demand is because of income, so our demand curve will be shifted. And there are two types of good. One is called normal good and the other one is called inferior good. Normal good are those goods when your income increases, their demand increases, and when your income decreases, their demand decreases. There is a positive relationship of those good with income. When income increases, demand increases for that good, and when income decreases, demand decreases for that goods. Normal good are vary from person to person. It might be possible that a thing which is normal for me, it may be inferior for you, and a good which is inferior for you, that might be possible that that good is normal for me. But the definition will remain same, that any good whose demand increases with increase in demand, that is called normal good, and when income decreases, demand for that good decreases. For example, we can take the example of chicken and mutton. As we know that mutton is expensive than chicken, so when our income increases we will demand more of mutton and we will buy less chicken. So in that case, chicken is our inferior and mutton is our normal good, as we increases the demand of mutton when our income increases. And in case of an inferior good, when our income increases, we will buy less of that good, that is called inferior good. As in previous example I told that when our income increases we will buy more mutton, so mutton is our normal good, and we buy less chicken, so chicken is our inferior good. But it may be vary from person to person according to his choice. A normal good and inferior good changes. The next variable which shifted or which bring change in our demand, that is called price of related goods. And there are two types of related goods. One is called substitute and the other one is called complement. Substitutes are those goods or services that can be used for the same or a similar purpose. You know, when we have don't tea, we will buy coffee. So coffee and tea both are substitute of each other. Gas and petrol. And other hand, complement good and services that are used together, like left shoe and the right shoe, or the car and the driver, they are complement. So when the price of the related good increases, our demand will also be affected, so our demand curve will be shifted. And the third variable which shifted our demand, that is called taste. You know, when people are addicted to any kind of taste, they will not bother their price. If price goes higher, they will still buy that good. So when people are addicted to any taste, so price will not matter to them. They are still buying that amount of goods. So in this case, demand curve will also shift it. The fourth variable which shifted our prices, or which shifted our demand curve, that is called population. You know, when there is more number of people, then there will be more demand for goods. So in this way, when population increases, demand also increases. So this is the four factor which, or four variable which shift our demand curve. And the last factor which shift our demand curve, that is called expected future prices. You know, being a rational consumer, when we know that in coming month the price of any product goes higher, then now we will buy more amount of that good. So in this way our demand increases, because our perception is that, or we are assuming that in future price is, or price will go higher. So now let's take more amount of that good. So this will increase the demand. So in this way our demand curve will shift it, as there is no change in prices at the moment. Price will change in future, and we are buying more of that good because we are thinking that in future price increases. So our this decision will increase the demand, but there is no change in price at current time period. So this will increase our demand curve. So these are the five factors which shift our demand curve. And uh, the last thing which we cover in this demand topic, that is change in demand and change in quantity demand. A change in demand refers to a shift in the demand curve, because a change occur in demand due to those variables which are being kept constant, or those variables which are other than the price. And change in quantity demand means change in demand due to change in price. So if there is change in price and change and demand is also changing, that is called change in quantity demand. And when there is no change in price but demand changing, that is called change in demand, because now demand changes due to certain other factors. So now that is all for our today lecture. In our coming lecture, we will start the other side of the economy, which is called supply side.